Welcome, everyone. My name is Robin. I am a longtime volunteer of Austin Design Week. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to this afternoon session. Thank you so much for joining us on the amazing topic of futuring. We want to encourage everyone to be a part of this week's event by sharing on social media. So you can find us on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. We definitely encourage you all to share with the hashtags ADW21 and futuring for every one of these events. Yes, even the virtual ones, they make for great Instagram stories. I also want to say a couple of thanks to our partners. Oops, let's go. Without this would not be possible. You know, we were able to make Austin Design Week a free event for all design people or all designers across Austin because of the great work and collaboration that these organizations are able to give for us. So big thanks to the Zebra and PayPal. Huge thanks to our amazing design team, the Label Collective. If you like the way Austin Design Week looks, it's because of their beautiful talents. Also, big shout out to Marketing 360, Material Plus, Cushing Terrell, Frog, Mathis Patistio, Bottle Rocket, IBM, and General Assembly. We cannot thank our sponsors enough. And when you're posting on social media about how much you're loving ADW21, please, maybe give a little bit of love to one or two of our sponsors. They'll definitely love it too. All right. I am now going to pass it off to Cindy Brummer. She's going to talk to all of you about Foresight Can Be 2020. Cindy, take it away.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. I'm so glad you guys are all here. I'm going to share my screen. So I have a slide deck to go through with you. So the topic here is all about stakeholders. But before we jump into getting alignment with our stakeholders, a little bit about me. My role is creative director and founder at Standard Beagle. We are a user experience design and development agency based here in Austin. And I'm so passionate about UX, user experience, all things that have to do with that I dove right in. So I have a master's in UX design, and I have written and contributed to a book on UX called 97 Things Every UX Practitioner Should Know. I teach UX at the University of Texas through the bootcamp program and as a teaching assistant at the Maryland Institute College of Art. And I'm love all this stuff. I'm in AAF Austin. I do all the things. So I've been doing this stuff for a long time. And as a result of all that work over time, I've had my share of working with stakeholders. And I guess I'd like to know from you all, have you ever had a tough stakeholder? If you have, I'd love to see a thumbs up in the reactions or share in the chat. Tell me a little bit about your stakeholders. I see some thumbs up, just a few. All right, so I'd love to hear from you if you want to type it in the chat. What are some of the things that you've noticed about tough stakeholders? What has been your experience? And maybe some feelings that you've had. Love to see that there. I'm hearing some people type. They don't know what they want. That's lack of flexibility, frustration, they're never happy, no budget, creative differences for sure, stubborn, inflexible. Oh my gosh. Yeah, changes their mind all the time. They withhold information. So we run into these stakeholders in all kinds of different parts of our work. Oh my gosh, you guys, this is awesome that everybody's had this experience of a tough stakeholder. And these tough stakeholders, they tend to, I don't know about you, but they tend to kind of pop up when we don't expect it to happen. And we're like, what just happened? It's like a truck ran into us and we're left trying to figure out how we can avoid disaster. And at the very worst, disaster actually does happen. The project gets derailed or it gets delayed. We're left holding the bag. We're constantly fighting. Our life is frustrating and it really causes so many problems. And hopefully, the project itself doesn't flop. But sometimes we feel like we flopped and it just makes things really just awful over time. So these tough stakeholders, I don't know that they I like to believe the best in people. I like to assume that they're not trying to hurt us in what we're doing. But we've got to identify this early. We've got to get ahead of disaster. And, you know, there's a couple of things that I've noticed in my work where we can kind of start noticing some very interesting patterns when it comes to stakeholders, particularly those tough ones, the negative ones that cause us so much frustration. The first thing I've noticed is that they start off critical, and it might be like this kind of bubbling that we kind of, write off at first, like we're trying to stay positive, whether they're an internal stakeholder or an external stakeholder. They start to like needle at us with little things that kind of come in, and we're too nice, to point that out, like, hey, you're being a jerk. We don't want to do that. But it's the little things that start to erode at us. Now, I'm thinking back to a project that I had years ago, and which ended in disaster. But I'm in reflecting, I should have seen it coming. The tough stakeholder that caused me so much pain in the very first meeting, the very first kickoff meeting, was the one that was critical, the one that immediately jumped on everything that was said. Why are we doing it this way? What makes you the expert here? And where I failed is that I didn't recognize that this was going to be a problem later. And so it's the little needling that gets to us. It's that needling that should tip us off that that person's not bought in. This lack of buy-in is going to just become like a huge snowball later if we let it get away from us. These are the ones that maybe at the very beginning, they're already saying, yeah, I don't think that this is the right approach. Or worse, they're not even speaking up at all. Maybe they're not even in the first meeting. They just decide that it's not worth their time, and they're not going to show up. And then they show up halfway through the project, when it's already really hard to make changes, and all of a sudden they want to make changes. And it's because they didn't communicate early on what they wanted. So what happens is that by overlooking this risk, we're setting ourselves up for disaster, because we don't recognize that these voices could hurt us later on. We're we're trying to be positive. We're excited about the very beginning of the project. We're excited to get started. And when we don't take into account the risk, it can set us up for disaster later. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't always do a risk assessment at the beginning of every project. And even when I do a risk assessment, I generally think about it in terms of like generalities, this type of person or this type of stakeholder, but I don't necessarily pinpoint like individuals themselves. So it can be really hard to notice when a stakeholder is going to cause us problems later. And here's the other thing about these tough stakeholders. They can influence others. They're the ones that are behind the scenes, and maybe at first they don't say anything, but over time they become like the bug in other people's ears, and they start to say, "Oh, do you really trust that person? Do you really trust that agency? Do you really think that they're doing a good job?" And they start to sow seeds of doubt, and they have a lot of influence. And this is where the projects get away from us, is because that lack of buy-in, that initial voice, and us not seeing the risk, it ends up influencing everybody else that's on the project, maybe even our champions. So what we have to do is get way ahead of this and align everybody and get them on the same page. And it can be hard, like if we set this as part of our process, it can make our life a lot easier. Now, there's no way I can guarantee that it's going to prevent every disaster, but what it can do is help mitigate the risk so that you are in a much better position. So what I'm going to be talking about today is getting in front of every crisis early on, like as soon as you can get everybody together in the same room. So my example, the one that went disaster, I'm not going to be talking about that. I'm going to talk about an example where this worked. After years of like fighting stakeholders and not understanding what to do, I finally got in a project and figured out a method that was going to work. This was pre-COVID, and we had a big website redesign that we were working on with a partner marketing agency. And I knew that this was going to be a tough project because we already had some critical voices in the room. Now, it was not like alarming. There were no red flags per se, but it was just enough of kind of a, questioning that kind of gave me like pause. And it was starting to set off like the alarm bells from the PTSD I had from all my terrible projects. That I was like, we've got to work on this. So the partner agency was really helpful in getting everybody in the same room together so that we could go through a process of alignment. Now, aligning the team is really helpful at the very beginning of a project. By doing a specific exercise, what we can do is we can equalize voices. That tough stakeholder has an outsized voice. They don't use it very much at the very beginning, but over time it becomes louder and louder, and it like drowns out everybody else, even your champions. So what we want to do at the beginning is make sure that everybody can be heard. What we can do with having everybody be heard is we can actually reverse the influence. Now, that stakeholder is still going to have a lot of influence, but by seeing everybody else in the room together that has a lot of excitement about a project and positivity, we can start to actually influence the negativity by overwhelming it with positivity. And people can feel a little bit more open to what we're offering. And also, by doing an activity where everybody can be heard, we can earn buy-in. Now, is it going to happen every single time? Maybe not. But more likely than not, just by feeling like they're being heard, that person is more likely to commit and buy in to the solution that you're going to move forward with. And the way that I do this is by doing what I call a vision meeting. It's at the very beginning of a project, and it's essentially a brainstorm session with all the key parties. And as part of that, we're doing an exercise to work silently together, and it gets everybody on the same page. Now, there are some key points to this vision meeting. The first one is that all of your key parties need to be part of this meeting. And this is going to be tough, especially if you have dozens. But say you have a group of, say, 10 to 20 inside a company that all have varying voices as part of it. You want to make sure that you bring as many of those folks together in the same room or in the same Zoom meeting. You also want to make sure that you are prepared with structured exercises. This is not a sitting around the table just talking kind of meeting. This is a structured exercise meeting. And it's intended to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. So I will show you how we're going to do all the exercises, but the key idea here is that it's not just sitting around and talking. You also want to have a strong facilitator. If it's you, then you need to be prepared to have that kind of facilitation hat on. But if you don't feel that you're the strong facilitator, you need to bring in someone that would be good for that role. And then finally, this key idea of working silently together. The reason that we want to do this is that we want to make sure that people are working and getting their ideas out without having a lot of people like dissing them. We want to make sure that nobody can have an outsized voice. I'll give you an example where I didn't do this. I was working on an intranet project many years ago, and it was important when I was working in the company to have all the different stakeholders that were part of how are we going to build this intranet. So I pulled in IT and I pulled in a few other department heads, and there were probably 16 to 20 people sitting around a conference table ready to have this meeting. And I wanted to present to them like, okay, we're going to do this intranet. And Here's what I think needs to be on it. And because I did not have it structured, I had not, planned on doing any kind of like actual brainstorming activity. The IT guy said, well, we can't do it your way. We have to do it my way. And this is why. And what happened was it devolved into a fight among myself, another marketing person, and IT over this idea. And everybody else just kind of sat around and watched. So that intranet never happened just because we never got off on the same foot. So don't do it like that. What you want to do is you want to pull parties together and have them get their ideas out on sticky notes like this and Sharpies. That way everybody can see everybody else's idea. And it kind of looks like this. So you can see an image from this vision meeting where everybody had a chance to sit at the table and write down each idea and then go up to the whiteboard and stick it on the whiteboard. And then after a little bit of time, they could go up and see what everybody else's idea was. So the method that you want to use is to have a space prepared where you can put your ideas on a whiteboard. And you can use sticky notes. You can use Sharpies. I like Sharpies because you can read it from a little bit of distance away. You have everybody there together with a facilitator. And what you're doing is you're trying to surface the ideas around the topic of what you're going to be getting on the same page around. The affinity map is what is the magic here. It's simple. It involves everybody. It involves both sides, the creative and the analytical sides of the brain. So whether you're a tech person, like say IT, and you're not a creative, or you are a creative, it involves every part of the brain. And I also know the nice thing is that it makes your work visible. So if you just sat around the table and you just put your ideas out there and nobody keeps a record except maybe in some notes, all of that goes away. But at the end of the vision meeting, we have like a whole record on like a whiteboard for everybody to see. And we can take pictures of it and we can show like, look what we did together. And the whole thing together promotes this idea of critical thinking. So instead of people focusing on their emotions and what they don't like and starting to get angry, what it does is it kind of gets them kind of focused in this logical state of the ideas of what they're creating so that they can be heard. And it becomes less of an argument and more of a constructive process. What ends up coming out of it might look something like this. We have a ton of ideas up on a whiteboard that you've categorized and started grouping together. And then you can kind of step back and start to, notice what you're doing. Now, as a UX designer, I use this method all the time for analyzing and synthesizing the research from my users or from usability testing. But the nice thing is that the affinity diagram lets you brainstorm and pull together ideas in all kinds of ways. So it's so flexible to use it for this kind of team or stakeholder alignment. Now, if you're facilitating something like this, it's really important to think about some key ideas here. You need to make sure that you are there to listen. It's all about hearing all the voices. So our tough stakeholders need to feel like you're hearing them, that you're not like pushing them off to the side. They need to be heard too. So your job is to listen to everyone and also stay objective so that all ideas can go onto the board. And you also need to have some kind of presence. This presence means that you can guide and pull people back when they start to go off onto tangents, because that is more than likely to happen, particularly in a room full of people that have very strong opinions. So if you don't feel like you're a good facilitator, then you can bring in someone and coach them on how to do this. The steps to get started are first to assemble all the people that need to be there. You might want to also have a couple of people from your team too, and not just be in a room with tough stakeholders, just so you can have some friendlies there. Decide who's going to facilitate so that they can be prepared with what they need to do in the room. And then you also need to set your objective. What is it that you intend to come out of this? It's some sort of alignment, whether it be alignment around the project that you're going to start working on. And within that, like, what is that alignment going to be? Is it going to be what content do we want to be on the website, or what direction do we want to go in terms of this product? Or, what is the identity of how we're going to be creating this? Whatever the objective is, it should be focused so that you're not trying to solve everything all at once. Now, if you're doing this with a group of people that have never done this kind of activity before, it's really important that you prepare them. So you might have some documents for them to read up on before they show up to this session. You might have like some instructions if they need to log into Zoom of where to go, what to bring. So definitely prepare people in advance. And then you need to decide where you're going to do this. What is the space? It should be if you're going to do it in person, a quiet space so that people aren't tromping through all the time that aren't part of the meeting. Or you can decide to do this in a remote space. So this can be done either remote or in person, but you're going to have to decide that ahead of time. Now, if you're doing this in person, you want to make sure that you have all of your physical materials prepped in time, okay? So you want to make sure that you have sticky notes for everyone. Sharpies are a good thing to have, and make sure you have a space. So I usually have a whiteboard, but you can do this on glass doors or on a plain wall. Usually the extra sticky notes will stick up on a wall as well. I also get dot stickers, and I don't have an example to show you, but you can get dot stickers from Office Depot, and they're pretty helpful. Don't try to skimp on time. That's the one piece of advice I have. I've tried to do these in 30 minutes, and there's never enough time for brainstorming in a 30-minute kind of thing, unless you have a very focused objective. I usually try to set at least an hour, but generally for these kinds of team alignment sessions, it's more than an hour. It might be 2, even like half a day. So make sure that you block enough time for this. It's really important that people don't feel like they're rushed. Now, if you're doing this remotely, there's some other considerations. You have to choose your digital collaboration tool, something that has sticky notes, ideally. So Mural or Miro are both great tools for this, but they're not the only ones on the market. So just make sure that you've chosen that and are familiar with it yourself before you jump in. You might even need to prepare that digital space just to make sure that people aren't trying to figure out how to pull a Post-it note over, because you'll have lots of that. The other thing you want to make sure that you have is an agenda with ground rules for how to interact remotely, because you can't see if someone's staring at their phone. You need to make sure that you're asking them. So those ground rules are really important to set the tone. You want to focus on keeping people engaged, whether they're in person or remote. Encourage people to keep on their camera so that you can see faces. I know I do this with my students all the time. I want to make sure I can see them. And then ask people to minimize interaction with any kind of distracting device, or have them close their email. I mean, when it's remote, you can only do so much, but ask them if they could refrain from doing anything else other than the activity with you. When you're doing long meetings, make sure you build in time for breaks. Usually once an hour is a good thing to get everybody a stretch break, stand up, take a bio break, something like that. And if you're in person, also it's good to have healthy snacks on the table in case somebody, feels like, they want to get something to eat. I usually want to have water or maybe granola bars or nuts right there. Not really a time to provide alcohol at that point, because you want to keep people focused, but maybe you can organize a happy hour to celebrate everything you've done right after. When it comes to running the exercises, once you've got everybody assembled and in the room, this is where kind of the magic takes place. So the ground rules are set, you've got everybody's attention, they've done their pre-reading, and now it's time to start with the questions. You want to pose one question at a time. And your questions are going to vary depending on your objective. What are you trying to align people on? So if you're working on a website project or you're trying to figure out the purpose of who you're going to be going after, your questions are going to be around that. So one example might be, what information should be included on the new website? Now, when I worked on the website redesign, we wanted to make sure that everybody was aligned on the purpose. What were we creating the site for? What was it? What was like the whole overall objective of who we were going to be reaching? Because there were multiple audiences. So what I really wanted our team to do was make sure that we were figuring out who the actual user was. So I ran the team through a series of questions about, who do you think the primary user is? And everybody wrote down their ideas, and they was varied across the team. Then I asked, what do you think is most important for those users to see on the website? And then everybody put out all their ideas. So your questions are going to vary, and this is going to take some forethought before you actually get into the session. Now, after you've posed the question, you're going to have everybody write their ideas down. This is where they work silently together. So I will have my stack of sticky notes, and I will be writing one idea per note. And then maybe I'll go ahead and put it up on the board, or maybe I'll keep it next to me and I'll stand up all at once. Or I might be working remotely, where I'm just typing on a Post-it note, moving it to the side, typing it on a Post-it note, moving it to the side. The whole purpose is to keep everybody working, and this is going to be a little awkward because no one's going to be speaking. But you don't want this to drag on for too long. Time box it. Generally, after 5 or 10 minutes, most people have come up with all the ideas they can think of for that particular question. So have them put it anywhere they want on the board. We don't want to filter yet. That's not the purpose. We just want to get all the ideas up there. Encourage people not to filter. Encourage people to put every idea up, no matter how crazy it is. This is not the time to start judging. The time now is to just get everything up there. And then you can start sorting through later to see what's most feasible. Once you've got all the ideas up for that question, then it's time to organize. What I typically do is I have the stakeholders themselves do the organization, especially if I'm the facilitator. I have them look at it, consider it, and work silently together to move sticky notes around on the board. This sometimes will cause questions like, well, what did you mean by this idea? And I'm not sure I understand this. And that's okay. Encourage them to ask questions, encourage people to answer, but this isn't the time to pass any kind of judgment. All they're doing is grouping. So grouping ideas they think are similar. There's no right or wrong here. It's really about what they think. And as they start to move ideas around, they'll start to see similar ideas come up that two different people wrote, or maybe they'll see some really divergent ones and they'll start to figure out where they should go. It's all about what they think are the right groups. Now, what you want to do as a facilitator is start to ask them, like, what are the different groupings that you see? How would you label those groups? And have them put the labels up on the whiteboard so that they can start to see the patterns. And then everybody understands what they're thinking. There might need to be some agreement between the groups, and that's okay. They are really in their logical mind now. They're less likely to be super emotional and angry. So it's okay to have them kind of work through that. You definitely want to be able to see clearly, like on the whiteboard. So here, this example here that I've created is just a basic grouping of categories that you can see some sticky notes that has some category labels on them. Now, once everybody's had a chance to kind of take it all in, then you can start to ask them to kind of focus in on the most important ones. This is where the voting and the dots come in. You can create dots in Mural, or there's dots in Miro as well. Or if you're in a physical space, you can give everybody 2 dots and tell them, put the dots on what you think are the most important ideas or where we should focus our effort. Um, if it's varies, sometimes you can give them 2 dots, you might give them 5 dots, depending on how much is on the board. And they can put all 5 dots on one sticky if they're really passionate about it, or they can spread them out. It's up to them. But what you want to do is start to create a heat map. Where are the patterns coming up? So you can see on this example activity that I put together, most of the dots were under this category label called personalization. Everybody was kind of focused on that. And it starts to give you an idea of what's the most important thing here, or maybe the most important idea to solve. So here's what that looks like, in terms of like actual activities. So this was a snapshot I took from the website redesign activity that I was putting together. And we were focused on patients and what they would think would be most important. And we started to see some similar things here. As a patient, I want to find a clinic near me. As a resident, I want to learn more about the organization. So these were all ideas that people started to see, and they started to group them together under different areas that they really wanted on the website. This was an activity that was done digitally using a mural board to kind of focus on like what were the most important things that we needed to focus on as a company. So people start to put together kind of their ideas, and we start to group them. And I encourage drawing. So it's okay to draw pictures and not just write words. So you can see someone felt really passionate about having pizza as part of this board, and all ideas are on the table. And here is a stakeholder alignment activity where we were focused on the features. So in this example, the client was wanting to do everything, all the things. I need all the features. But when we start to pull together this activity, we started to see that, yeah, we could do all the features if we had years to work on this. But since we only have a limited amount of time, what should we focus on first? And so I started to be able to pull them and rein them in and find things that they really wanted to focus on first. So we started to color code and add dots to the most important ideas. And it's kind of hard to see because this wasn't a great picture, but this was another activity. These were all done in different breakout rooms on the same mural board, so I could keep track of it. And everybody had like different ideas, they grouped them, and then they started to vote on the ideas that they wanted. So it was a multi-room activity, and then we all came back together at the end. So you're probably thinking, God, this is just an affinity diagramming activity. Why in the world does this work? I mean, how could this possibly build alignment? Well, for one, it gets everybody to be heard. And sometimes tough stakeholders are only making your life a living hell because they didn't feel like they were heard from the very beginning. And there's something magical about feeling heard. People just want to express themselves. Even if you don't end up doing what they want, they had their voices heard. And this is what is part of this activity, is they are able to get their ideas out there and successfully in front of people. And you're also modeling positivity. So there's something magical about having that tough, like critical stakeholder that is suspicious, maybe, not sure that this whole thing is going to work, by seeing other people so excited about it. They start to kind of, ease into it and feel a little bit more open to these ideas because everybody else is part of like feeling like really into this activity. And so that positivity starts to rub off on them. And so over time, what you're doing is you're starting to get them to commit. Maybe they still don't agree with it, but they had their voices heard. And because of that, they're more likely to be able to commit to the direction because they're seeing what everybody else thinks is a good direction to go in. And, they're more willing to go in that direction as well. So I was absolutely certain that with the website redesign, if before I did the vision meeting, that we were going to have so many problems throughout the design that I was going to get a lot of pushback. What ended up happening at the end of the activity was that everybody who was a stakeholder looked at it and they were in commitment of the direction that we were going to go for the website. So that when we got a little bit farther into the design, I got pulled up in front of the board to present what we had done. And I had to go and I said, this is what we've done and this is what we found and this is the direction that I think we should go in. And when the board started to push back, well, I don't think you're going in a direction that we don't think. Everybody that had been a stakeholder in that meeting jumped to our defense and said, no, they know what they're doing. This is the way we're going to go. We've all agreed to it. You can't make that change now. So they became our advocates as a result of being part of that meeting. And I never had an issue with the client because of that, because they all were like in it and they were part of it and they were proud of it at the very end once we launched the project. And that's what's so magical about these kinds of meetings. People just want to be understood. They want to be heard. And by letting people vent and get out their ideas, you're making it a lot more likely that those people who are frustrating for you actually become your champions. And that's what's so magical about the whole thing. So I wanted to open it up to questions. I'm sure that you have some. Feel free to come off mute. And I think there was some in the chat as well. Okay, I'll answer some of the chat, but also feel free to come off mute. How do you convince stakeholders to participate in vision meetings? It's hard. I think I usually like kind of slide it into the kickoff and make it as part of a kickoff meeting agenda. That's usually how I do it, and I kind of blindside them by it. But that's kind of my method. The other thing I'll do is I usually have some sort of advocate or champion already in the organization, and I get them on board, and then they help convince the rest of the stakeholders to be part of that process. What other questions do you guys have? Let's see, I've had stakeholders that might be considered difficult bring up really good points about risks, challenges with the project that helps make the project stronger. How do you make sure that we don't lose that element? That's a really good question, Caitlin. I think that, that's something that you could actually bring up in the vision meeting. What are the challenges? What are the obstacles that we could run up against? Having everybody surface those brings that to everyone's attention. And I think it's important. You shouldn't shy away from those kinds of questions at all. Did that answer your question? I hope. I'm going to assume yes. Let's see. Melody asked, would this activity be done in place of or in addition to a stakeholder interview? I usually do stakeholder interviews individually. So you can definitely ask some of the same questions, but kind of the purpose of this activity is for the stakeholders to see and get a kind of a pulse on what other people are feeling so that you can reverse the influence on them. So I would do it in addition to stakeholder interviews for sure. A current challenge, Jen asks, a current challenge I have is management stakeholders actively resisting letting their staff participate in any sort of affinity activities or focus groups because some ideas may be too far out there. How would you handle that sort of objection? Ooh, that's a tough one, Jen. That I haven't overcome it in every single case, but what I would suggest is acknowledging the concern about it being, an activity that they might feel is like not going to help with the project, but maybe show how, by diverging and letting all those ideas come out, then focusing in on what's feasible will be a very beneficial overall to the project and actually get people back on the same page. But it's tough. Sometimes it just takes a little bit extra effort to try to convince them. What I might also do is maybe do a practice activity with some friendlies and kind of show them the results of how it can turn out. That might help as well. After the voting session, how do you facilitate the conversation to get the top things voted and not get sidetracked by passionate stakeholders? That's a good one. One thing you could do is if you feel like you need to have like a decider in the room, give them the ultimate vote. You know, ultimately the decision comes down to one person. That might be one way to handle it. I haven't actually run into too many passionate stakeholders that are feeling still so energetic by the end of these activities because I've worn them out through hours of this kind of stuff. So you might just do it by wearing them out. That might be one way to do it. The other thing is, you know, always acknowledge, like, I hear what you're saying, you know, that's a really important point. But let's take a look at what's here. You know, what you're seeing here is that the heat map is here. And, you know, your idea may not be aligned with that. A lot of people will kind of see the writing on the wall. So when I worked on another facilitation with an intranet project also, everybody was coming from different departments, and IT was, again, very passionate about their ideas of technology and what would be important. But once they kind of got a feel for what everybody else thought, they backed off. They started to get influenced by seeing what everybody else had, and that was very helpful to it. How do you stop the stakeholders from communicating behind your back? I haven't figured that one out, Sarah. Uh, I do my very best to get on their side, make them feel heard so that they don't feel like they have to talk about me behind my back. I can't say that that keeps them from doing it. And I'd say that that's a really tough one. One thing I do is I meet with stakeholders frequently. I don't ever want to have them wonder what's going on with the project. So I try to do multiple checkpoints throughout. The vision meeting does help to get them on your side, but you have to keep them on your side. Let's see. What do you say to stakeholders who say, we don't have time for this, we need to act fast? That is a great point, Courtney. What I would say to that is, absolutely, we can act fast. And here are the risks of that, of what could happen if we act fast without getting everybody aligned. And maybe kind of point out, like, we can keep this short to just 2 hours, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page and improve communication. That is a tough one, though, when you have people who are just want to drive forward. I've definitely run into that in the past, and sometimes I can't overcome it. Any recommendation as to who should come first, the stakeholder interview or the alignment meeting? Yeah, I've done it both ways. I think the stakeholder interview helps to understand the politics, and it's a good opportunity to find out who all should be in that big alignment meeting. So you can ask questions individually of folks and find out, well, who else is involved? And that's kind of your intel exercise of finding out who else has say and influence, so that you can make sure that everybody is involved in the alignment meeting. Okay. Jaslyn asked, do you have thoughts on stakeholder groups that aren't clear with you about who is actually a stakeholder in the first place? I'm thinking about a project that early on pulled in people who ended up not being stakeholders, which caused the whole project to derail. Oh my gosh, I hate when that happens. Yeah, that one's a really tough one. And I've had this question before, and I don't know that I have a perfect answer for it. But sometimes if you can do like that interview work ahead of time and kind of start to ask questions where you're not directly asking who all is a stakeholder, but you start to ask the questions around it, and you start to understand, oh, there's other players here. Should that person be involved? Should this person be involved? That's one way you can do it. But I know I've heard this from other agencies, that sometimes people don't tell you who all the stakeholders are. So you might have to do extra research up front, but it's really hard, and that's a really tough situation to be in. How do you maintain the balance of creating space for everyone's ideas while still staying within a project scope? Oh, Alana, that's a really good question. I that's one reason for the objective and the purpose of what's happening there. But sometimes I like to keep a question in there that just allows everybody, like, if in a perfect world, what are all the things that you want on this? And then what you can start to do is have that conversation early around here, these things aren't in scope right now, but let's hold on to them for later, so that if we do a change order, or if we do an extension to the project, we still have these, and stay super positive about it, and keeping everybody kind of like, okay, good, I got my ideas out there. And then you can have that conversation around, like, well, this is not in the current scope, but it's such a great idea. Let's hold on to it for later. Sometimes that helps. Dylan asks, what do you do if you work for a nonprofit and there aren't enough Sharpies? That's such a great question. Yeah, I just, well, I mean, I went out and bought a whole bunch. So you can borrow mine, Dylan, if you'd like. I'm happy to loan them out so you can use them for your work if you can't get them to buy a box of Sharpies, for sure. I think I got through all of the questions. Does anyone want to come off? Oh, oh, people won't give them back. I know. I'll go out and get them, Sherry. I'll go get more. Does anyone have any other questions? Feel free to come off mute too. I've heard myself talk in my head for a really long time.
Hello.
Hey, Christina.
Hey, so I know that through these sessions that I've done, everyone feels really drained. And I know you mentioned that earlier in one of your answers. Is there any way to help maintain that energy besides like the little break in between? Yeah, because I just don't want the morale to be low as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, one, the facilitator has to stay upbeat and positive, because the energy projecting from the facilitator makes a big difference. And that's why I like to do frequent breaks, stretch breaks, have people stand up, walk outside if you're near an outside place. That helps a lot. And the healthy snacks also helps kind of people stay up and going. But it all comes down to the energy that the facilitator is putting out there. So I mean, I actually try to keep it fun. I crack jokes. I'm going around talking to people. I might sound like I'm not all that professional, honestly, because I'm getting to know people. Tell me about that. Oh, what are you listening to on Spotify? Like I exaggerate, like over exaggerate, energy when I'm doing it. And I'm sure my students will tell you the same thing. Like when I'm teaching, I'm boom, 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 boom all the time. But it also helps to keep people on their feet, really tough in a remote situation. So I would add in like extra breaks, like between each question, let them step aside, step back, and then come back. Let's see. There was a question of, can you share the recording after the sessions? Yes, we are recording, and Austin Design Week is going to make sure that everybody can get access to it. Any other questions? Please come off mute if you want.
Hi,
Yeah, I'm
Cindy.
curious.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead, Sherry. I'll go next.
I'm curious, you're bringing this from the perspective of an agency owner. So I'm a little curious if you can talk about, is this part of the overall package that they've already paid for then, or are you billing them extra for this?
Usually I think about it at the very beginning. And sometimes if like I can feel it coming, I try to like throw it in because, but it depends. Most of the time I'm thinking about it ahead of time, and I will make sure that I build that vision meeting into the very beginning of the project.
Yeah, because I can see for my freelance clients them being like, I don't want to pay for that, but I feel like it's worth it, even if they're not technically paying for it. It's just part of the overall engagement.
Yeah, they won't pay for it if it's like a line item for sure.
Thanks.
Was it Andrew?
Yeah, sorry, I popped in a little bit late. What do you do in the case where we had an early stakeholder meeting with the project and everyone was on the same page, and then like 4 months later, someone else hire, but not in the same department, and like made a big decision about like, hey, we're actually going to completely change everything, and then the other departments that had been in the original stakeholder meeting were not like told, and it left on to like to me to try to navigate and bring everyone along. And I don't know if that's like time for like a new stakeholder meeting after that, and to be like, hey, the issue being though that top-down decision then was not human-centered design. Like that was just someone being like, I want this my way. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. If you can do another alignment meeting, same page, that's helpful. But that higher up kind of throws a wrench in everything. I've been in that situation before. I've actually done an entire website build all around a specific logo that had been designed early on, only to have the high up completely change the logo, and everything changed, like everything. And there was really nothing we could do at that point. It was so near the end of the project, it just didn't make sense to do an alignment meeting. I would say that you might think about, like in future projects, how can you make sure that you identify anybody who might have like some say down the road, like especially if it's a department and they're higher ups, maybe, you know, if you have to do some kind of secret questioning, or they don't realize they're being interrogated about who else could have a say in this project, and then inviting them to be part of some sort of same page meeting so they can be heard. But sometimes, yeah, that's just the whims of the VP or whoever it is that just decides that they're going to come in and blow everything up. But if it's early enough on in the project, and you're having to deal with them and pull them all together into one room and do activities together.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. All right. I think I know that we're going to wrap up at 3, but does anyone have any other questions? I'm sure I can answer a couple before we wrap up. Well, in the meantime, so stay in touch. I love communicating with people, particularly on LinkedIn. You can find more about Standard Beagle at standardbeagle.com, and then connect with me on LinkedIn. It's easy, just find me under Cindy Brummer. Just send me a note to let me know that you saw me at Austin Design Week, because I don't connect with just everybody, only people that like tell me where I met them before. So I really appreciate you all. Thank you so much for coming to this session. I hope you got a lot out of it, and I hope that we can stay in touch in the future. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Cindy. I just want to thank everyone for coming today. It's been amazing to have you as a part of this session. Remember, we still have a whole other day of programming and tomorrow's ending party. So we've got creative mornings tomorrow morning. We also have an awesome event tonight at Cheer Up Charlie's. So definitely check out the schedule to find out what other free events you can go to while we are still around. But thank you so much, everyone. It has been such a pleasure, and I hope everyone has a wonderful and safe afternoon. Thank you.
Bye, you guys.
Thank you.
It's good to see you, Sherry.
Yeah, you too. This was awesome. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, you bet. I'm glad you're here.
I feel like this is the time we talk after in an in-person event, right?
I know. We always like
Good to see you too,
yeah.
Robin.
Oh, hey, Sherry. Great to see you. Well, I'll leave this going until 3. So if you want to keep chatting because it's the end of a session, by all means, we'll probably cut this from the video edit. But by
Yeah.
all means.
No,
Yeah.
this is the best part of events sometimes, right? Come early, chat. But I've been talking to people, like I love the mix of the remote and the in-person. It's been great.
Yeah, no, that's been awesome. I haven't been able to really go to very much this week, but I encouraged my staff. So I have at least a couple of staff members that have been going to the in-person and the virtual events all week, which is great because I'm like, ooh, what did you learn?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been
I have a
amazing.
Quick question for you guys.
Sure.
I know you said it's being recorded. This is my first time to Austin Design Week. It's been so much fun, and I've just enjoyed all the people that have contributed. How do we gain access to the videos of things we saw and maybe things we didn't see and wished we had been there?
That's a great question. So they are going to, the Austin Design Week team is going to be bringing all the videos together, editing things down. So where you're only getting, you're missing out on kind of the front and the back, which, isn't
Just
the
the
great
essence,
juicy
yeah.
content. And then they will email you the ones for the videos, the ones that you've actually registered to attend. So you'll get this one. And then they will be posting the larger events on the schedule website. So just keep checking back in the next few weeks and you'll see them.
So on the website, then it won't come
Yes.
by email or Slack or anything like that.
Yes.
You're so wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad you're a part of this. Welcome to Austin Design Week.
This has been fun, and I've been like roping as many people as I can into it that are in my circle. I'm like, did you guys know this was going on over there? Come on, you got to come play with me. So it's been great.
Well, we're so glad that you gave us some time, and yes, keep telling everybody this is the 6th year, and it's just getting better and better every year.
I'm thinking about changing my name to Grandma Needs a Sherpa, because some of the tools I'm wanting to learn now that you've been using that I'm not.
You got
familiar
this.
with. Okay, well, if I keep showing up, maybe I'll figure it out.
Thank you.
You. Appreciate you guys.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Thanks.
I am curious about like some of the events are webinars, some are meetings. Is that up to the host?
Yep, the host got to decide, and it really just depends on how much interaction they want to have.
Yeah, interesting. Speaking of which, Cindy, I was like, is that your office? That's amazing. At first I thought it was a virtual background.
Nope, this is my office. So so it's a little messy over here. And
Well, it could be a virtual background, I'm telling you. Your interior design is really lovely too.
oh, thank you. This was my COVID project. So
I'm
I
impressed.
was like, I'm on Zoom all the time. It's got to look good. But I know we're going to be cut off soon, but I also am building a video studio. So you can kind of see the light that we're starting to install. My brother-in-law is a gaffer, and I was like, you've got to help me. My lighting needs, like on Zoom, it's fine because I have these lights, but I wanted to have a video camera set up and do like a little shot. And so we're working on lighting.
Oh, that's awesome. I may follow up with you and ask more about that. But yeah, definitely. This was really great just to, hear more of your tactics and, something I think everybody resonated with. So again, thanks for your time, and thanks for volunteering, Robin, and everybody.
My pleasure.
Definitely.
All right. Have a great day, Sherry.
All
Thanks
right.
so much, Cindy.
Take
Great
care.
job.
See you later. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.